Hi friends, I'm Anna Helman. Thanks so much for being here today. Today I want to share with you about spritzers. Spritzers are a small, inexpensive tool that you can add to your craft collection that opens up so many possibilities for how to use them. Now in most cases, spritzers are used to apply a liquid, a mist, to your project. So in a lot of cases, it may be a certain color of ink that you've mixed with either water or rubbing alcohol, and you can apply some splatters. Or maybe you're spritzing over a stencil or for a particular background. But there are lots of other ways to use spritzers as well. I'm really excited. This video is packed with all kinds of ideas and things that hopefully you can try in your craft room. So I hope you watch along. Here are a few of my spritzers. So what these are, it's a small bottle that you can put a liquid in the bottom, has a cap to remove. Here is the pump area that you press to dispense the liquid, and then this screws off for refilling it and for cleaning it out when you want to do that. So as I mentioned, what these are used for most often is to apply a mist or a splatter of some sort over your project. So let's look at a few cards that I've made that have splatters on them, just to give you an idea of what this can add to a project. So here is one that you can see I've done some masking and some things, but there's a really fine mist over here on this side. Here are some, I just loved how these turned out. Now I will say, I created splatters in different ways on some of these cards, but just quickly here at the beginning, I wanted to share with you some inspiration for what splatters can do to your projects. I just love that little bit of texture around the edge or coming out from behind something that I'm adding to my card. And misters, the spritzers, are a great way to be able to do that. So here are a few ideas. So let's do some misting. Let me bring in some grid paper to protect my work surface. And here is something I stamped with the Eclectic Garden stamp set, the cute little beets, and I'm not sure what kind of berries or olives or what these are, but I colored them purple, so we'll call them berries. Now here I have a spritzer that I have put. Which one is this? Is this water or rubbing alcohol? Let's talk about the difference. Sometimes I use water in them, sometimes I use rubbing alcohol. It's totally up to you. The difference is rubbing alcohol will dry faster and it typically warps your paper less. So I do like to use rubbing alcohol when I can, but water works just fine. It's not going to be a problem at all if you just choose to use water in them. So I have one of those liquids in here. I will know once I spray and I smell it. But I've also added some ink refills. So I believe I had some gorgeous grape. These are not the colors I put in here, but I had some gorgeous grape in here, and then I did add a little bit of real red. So that's kind of fun, that if you're trying to match something and you may not have an ink pad in your collection, you can mix, if you have ink refills, you can mix them and maybe come up with a color that will work for your project. So I am just going to hold this over top. If you try using spritzers, you definitely want to play around with how close or far away you are. The closer you are, you're going to get a more condensed area that you're covering. And I am going to move back here, and it is going to spread out where that mist is showing up, okay? So you can just mist around the edges, you can mist the whole thing, you can mist it until it is covered. Maybe you don't have a particular color of cardstock. You can mist until it's covered, and then you do have that color of cardstock that you can use for a project. So that's just kind of a basic intro to spritzing. Now, let's look at some stepped up ways to do basically the same thing. So I'll bring in 2 card mats, and I'm going to bring in some stencils or some masks, whatever you prefer to call them. Let's put one here. Let's put this one over here, and I'm going to do some spritzing over top of these. So I am going to try to spritz that one somewhat evenly. This one, we're going to take a different approach, and I am going to spray at the 2 corners. So the easy way to clean your masks off is just to run them under the sink and then lay them on a towel to dry. But let's take a look at what we have underneath. We have this lovely check pattern that is fairly even in color across, because that's the goal I was shooting for, was to make it even. Then we have this that is very distressed looking. You can see the pattern more at the corners and less in the center. So that's a fun way to use your spritzers. Now let's take a look at a similar option using your die cuts, or you could use punches as well. Here is a card I made here recently for a tutorial on using masking paper. So masking paper is a very thin paper. It has been designed to be sticky on the back, and there's a removable paper backing that you can remove when you're ready to. But it has a very gentle stick, so you can apply it to a project, do some kind of fun technique. This card I created with blending brushes, and then once you're done, you can remove it. So let's use this, and let's do some spritzing over it. Now when I'm done, I will either have to wait until my liquid has dried on here, or be very careful as I'm removing it to make sure I don't smear anything. But we'll put that in place. Let's do some spritzing. And pull that off and see what we have. Now, masking paper may not actually be designed to get wet, but I wanted to show you, if you want to save your templates and reuse these, I talked in that tutorial about putting them on wax paper and saving them and reusing them. If you want to do that, spritzing them may not be the way to go. Some of these detailed areas are pulling apart, but I just wanted to show you the options. You could cut your die out of something a little bit more durable, like a window sheet that would be reusable and cleanable, just like a stencil. But there we get a similar look to the blending brushes, but just with a little bit more texture. This may be self-explanatory, but I just want to mention, because sometimes we forget the simple things, that you can just create some really basic backgrounds, okay? If you don't have a lot of designer paper in your collection, we should chuckle, right? I know a lot of us have a lot of paper in our collections, but let's say you don't have the right color or something. You just want something basic for a background. You can create tons of backgrounds so fast with spritzers. So there is a simple idea, because sometimes we make things more complicated than they have to be. I will mention, I don't want to forget this, that sometimes you want some uneven splatters. So if you want more splatters, you want some uneven ones. Now this isn't going to work right now, right? Of course, because there we go, I'm getting a few. You can pull this out and do some dribbling, and typically, I'm not sure what's going on here. Typically this works a little bit better, but that is something you can do as well to get some of those larger, more uneven splatters. Okay, let's look at some more ways to use these. And I really, really love these next couple of ideas. They are completely different from the ones we started with, but several times in my tutorials, I've shared ideas for inking your stamps, spritzing them, and then stamping on your project. So let's do that. So for these next couple, you're going to want to use plain water in your spritzer. So let's ink up the stamp. Going to ink up, this is a cute little stamp from the Simply Fabulous stamp set. So I'm going to ink it up. I want to keep everything kind of away from where I'm doing my spritzing. I'll spritz my stamp. You could do this, you can play around with how many times you spritz. How many times did I just spritz? Was it twice? Now I'm going to re-ink the stamp, but because there's water on it, I want to stamp that off on my scrap paper before I re-ink. That way I don't get water in my ink pad. We can play around with this. Let's spritz this one once. And This next one will spritz, how about 3 times? So that one got pretty watery, so you can see a difference on how much water was applied. Now let's add some flowers to these cute little stems. So I'll bring in my Poppy Parade ink. We'll ink that stamp, give it a little spritz. And add those on there. Clean that off quickly. I'm going to do 1 spritz this time. So you get kind of a fun watercolor look when you do this without the watercoloring. So basically you're just stamping, but you get that really fun watercolor look. And actually I have some other card samples here to share with you showing this technique, as well as a couple of the ones I just shared a moment ago. So let's take a look at them real quick. Here is a really fun card that I created a while back for a tutorial on the spritzing technique. So I inked my stamp each time, I spritzed it, and then I stamped, and you get this really beautiful watercolory look. So I don't know if I mentioned, most of these cards that I'm sharing, I have tutorials for them. I'm going to put links in the video description below to all of them. I'm going to try for all of them. So take a look. If you see a particular card that you really love, you want to learn how to do something, take a look at those links and you can learn how to do them. Now here's another idea. If you don't really want to spritz your stamps, what you can try is to do your stamping and then spritz it afterwards. So for this to work, I encourage you to use watercolor paper or some shimmery white cardstock. You can try this with regular white, but I typically have get my best results when I'm using water if I have shimmery white cardstock or the watercolor paper. And the one I just did, I didn't mention this, but that was the shimmery white, just so that you know. So I did my stamping, that same stamp set that I just used, and I am going to add some water, just plain water. We're going to spritz over the top and wait a moment. I don't like to spritz too much all at once because sometimes the colors start to run and then I'm like, oh, slow down. Wait, can I take some of that water back? So if you can tell, the water is, or the color is starting to bleed a little bit. So this is something, again, you never know exactly what results you're going to get until you do it. At this exact moment, I'm wondering like, oh, should I stuck with more of an even color palette instead of all of these different colors? Are they going to look brown when they run together? I don't know. But definitely something fun to try, and I've gotten some really neat results with this technique in the past as well. Here are 2 cards I should have shown a little bit ago, but these are where I spritzed. This one was a mask I spritzed over. This one was a die cut that I did, but just 2 more examples of techniques that I've done with spritzers. Now let's do some watercolor techniques, like real watercoloring. Okay, what we just did was practice. I'm going to put a foam pad underneath my grid paper because this one gets a little bit messier. Here's a piece of watercolor paper, and I'm bringing in a block and several colors of ink. Now I'll share with you, here were some fun watercolor cards I created not too long ago that I loved how they turned out. They were so much fun to create, and then I loved how they turned out. This one in particular, I created that background using the technique I am going to show you right now. And again, that's another tutorial you can go take a look at if you want to. So for this technique, I usually like to use 3 colors of ink. I brought in my Real Red, my Cherry Cobbler, and my Merry Merlot. Now, the color I want to ink with first is the color that's in the middle of the 3. So the medium shade, you want to choose similar shades. If you don't want your ink pads to blend if they're not similar shades. So, okay, Cherry Cobbler is my middle color. I'm going to put that on about 2/3 of the block. Mary Merlot is my deepest color. I'm going to put that over top of my middle shade on about 1/3. Okay, so if my darker color soaks up my middle color, it's not really a big deal. I just don't want my lighter colors to soak up my darker colors, if that makes sense. I'm going to flip this around and apply. Technically, I should have done this one first. I just don't want to get it soaking up that middle color. So that was my real red. That was my lightest color. Now let's shift around my grid paper a little bit. I want to do some spritzing and I want to keep the mess right here on my paper. So I am going to apply some spritzes of water. I never really know how many I'm going to apply. Let's say 9. I'm not sure what that was. And then I'm going to flip this upside down and apply it to my watercolor paper and give it a nice good press. I put that foam pad underneath to give it a little bit of cushion and help make sure that all of the areas are going to get some color. Now, if you end up with white, like I did right here, that means that you could have applied some more water. So what you can do in this case, you can wipe this block off, reapply ink and start over if you want all of this to be covered. Or sometimes what works is just to apply some more water over here and the color will start to move around. Sometimes I actually like to leave that white depending on what I'm doing, and sometimes I want it to be solid. So that gives you a fun way to create some really, really neat backgrounds. I've created probably some of the most beautiful cards I've ever made using this technique right here. And I love to do it for nighttime cards like that, like the fireflies card I just showed you. So let's move this out of the way. I want to talk about one more watercolor technique, and then at the end, one more really simple one that makes such a fun addition to pretty much every project you make. So let's look at watercoloring embossing folders. This is a tutorial I have been working on, and I'll pull this in so you can see the card first before I explain. So this is embossed. I did use watercolor paper and I used some ink on my embossing folder, spritz it with some water, and then I ran it through. But isn't this just a really neat, unique card with the texture and the color all put together? So I did mention, quickly I will mention, but this will be in the links below as well. You can apply ink to your embossing folder in several ways. You can use a marker, you can use sponge daubers, or you can use an ink pad and just ink the entire ink pad or part of the ink pad with the ink pad directly. After your color is on there, spritz it several times like what we've been doing here. Spritz it with some plain water. Carefully lay your watercolor paper inside, run it through the machine, and you can get a result similar to this. So another fun way to use your spritzers. Okay, we are almost to the end. I have one more idea. I'll bring back in my messy grid paper and share this last idea with you, but this is the one, honestly, that I think is the most versatile and you can use on basically all of your projects. So what I'm going to do is mix some paint in here. I talked at the beginning, you can mix inks in here, different ink colors. You can mix paint, you can mix powders. I know you have all kinds of fun things in your craft collection that you can mix in these. I've actually wondered about mixing them with chalk pastels, but I haven't tried it. I'm not sure if the chalk would disperse itself in the liquid or not, but something you can try if you want to. So here's my spritzer. I have some shimmer paint. This is just acrylic paint that's been around, and I love the shimmery aspect of it, but I am going to put several drops of my shimmer paint into the spritzer. And my paint it's been around a little while. Like I mentioned, I'm gonna have to shake pretty hard to get it mixed up because it's getting a little bit thick. But you can see I've got, that would be several drops, probably 6, maybe 8 drops. Give it some really good shakes. And now I can test this out. I have to spritz a few times for that to get up into the dispenser. And see if I am getting that shimmer result. So I'll play around with it some. I may need to go back and add some more, but I thought this embossed snowflake with the color added would be perfect for some shimmers. And it is. I don't know if you can see that or not, but we have this nice glimmering coat over the top. I may go ahead and add some more. And you can play around with this. You may want to use some rubbing alcohol when you're doing this, but just a little bit of shimmer on your card projects just is such a nice finishing touch. So I hope this gives you some great ideas for how to use spritzers in your crafting. If you're new here, I would love for you to subscribe. Give me a thumbs up and a comment. That helps other crafters find my videos as well, and I truly appreciate it. If you're interested in any of the products I use, there are links in the video description below. You can order through me. I send personal thank yous to all of my customers that I appreciate you so much, and you can also earn free products through my Stampin' Rewards program. Thanks for being here. I hope you have a blessed day, and I hope you'll be back again next time when I'll be here helping you to hand make with love.